an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire C Book 1, chapters 17 and 18 and 19. In these chapters, there is a pitched battle in which Calder absconds with Niberius. I wasn't sure if Niberius was with them or not when they reached the Grey Island. Apparently, he is. And I'm beginning to think that the secret item I kept thinking was a key is a crown. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is also here in the chat. And George miscalculated the number of pages in the first booking. So after this, there are going to be 3 more episodes, but there will be a break. So the next episode won't be until the end of October, Friday, October 29th, just before Halloween. And then Tuesday the 2nd and Tuesday the 9th. Just so you guys are aware. Because for the most part, everything with that Will White has written has been steadily week to week. But this is there was unfortunately no time earlier that was open for me to slot those in. George says, yes, so sorry, with a cry emoji. It's okay, it happens. I just felt bad because there wasn't really anything I could do at that point. It was just too late. I get booked up so fast. But nevertheless, I'm glad that we were able to figure something out so that there wasn't too huge a gap. I mean, a little over a month sounds like a long time, but really it's not, for especially like these books are not as difficult for me to keep track of things. There are some things I've covered where that kind of break would be a problem. But I think it'll be all right. So these chapters start off with 17, and I had mentioned part of the beginning of 17 last episode because I accidentally listened into this section just like, I think I got 3 minutes into the audiobook before I realized, oh shit, I'm over. But I am really, I am all about Urzaya's POV. Everything about knowing that Urzaya is going to die is so much more painful here. I really wonder what it would have been like to read this one first, because it's a very different vibe with Shara's POV. As far as I can recall, other than the very little girl that she, winds up sort of coming to her defense and killing her master in the first chapter, I don't recall any major death that got to me much in Shara's POV. There was a lot of danger and a lot of moments, but I don't think that there is an equivalent to if you were reading these in the opposite order. So I feel like there's just a cultivated dread here that in some ways is painful, but I almost think is better than reading it in the other direction. Dread is one of those things that can be abused as an author or can be really, really well done. I personally tend to like it a lot of the time. Somebody who uses dread a great deal, unsurprisingly, is Stephen King. And I have read some of his books that I felt like dread was used excellently, where he'll just drop a line like, little did any of them know that was the last time they would see him alive. And now you just have to wait and see what the fuck happens to this guy. And you know something bad, but it's just, However, it can be abused to the point where you're just like, you're drawing this out. Come on. And with Urzaya, it's so effective because the more we get to know about him, the more we like him, And so by the time we eventually get to his death, it's going to be, we're going to feel that much closer to him. And it just goes to show how effective it is when a writer knows how to do this well versus, for example, one of my favorite examples of this being done really badly is The Walking Dead, where they would decide a character was going to die that episode, and you would know who the character was, because at the start of the episode, that person who had previously been hugely unimportant, if not downright unlikable, suddenly was made to be much more humanized, and they gave us all kinds of background on their tragic history. It was like this dead giveaway. Oh, okay, this guy's going to be dead at the end of this episode. They're trying to make us give a shit. And they waited too long. We didn't give a shit, and we never did give a shit, and this just made us irritated. Uzziah is so good-hearted, despite being this, maniac killer. It's not his fault, and he honestly is so transparent in the way that he deals with people, and that can be a real difficulty if you are not someone with the kind of strength that he has to defend himself with. Being a straight shooter only really works if you're strong enough to back it up. Otherwise, there's a reason that people are passive aggressive, So I'm going to read the beginning of 17. A true champion of the Champions Guild is more than just soulbound. The champions are raised from an early age on an abusive regimen of training and actual combat. They are taught nothing but battle, raised to believe that victory is the only virtue. Along the way, they're subject to a battery of alchemical treatments to increase their physical and mental attributes. Most of the children do not survive, but the survivors emerge with incredible gifts. I doubt the ethics of such a system, but I cannot doubt its results. From the official report of the witness assigned to the Champions Guild. This really reminds me of the Unsullied in Song of Ice and Fire, which I'm doing a read of it with my friend Rashawn, who only ever saw the TV show. And we have not yet reached the Unsullied, but I feel that reading is going to be worse than watching. This sort of thing is just so hideous, So, Uzziah is going through some breathing exercises. It had been a long time since he'd fallen into this habit of his. Before each match in the arena, he had sat and calmed himself, focusing, stripping away hesitation and thought. A practice they'd taught him as a fighter of the Champions Guild. It was ingrained in him after so many years. Whenever he felt he should prepare for a fight, he would sink into this state. And now here he was. A battle was coming. The chronicler smiled too much. The captain hadn't spoken of it, but Uzziah was sure the man had killed his own Silent One. Now Andal and the captain had been invited to another navigator's vessel to meet with Nibiria's mysterious backers, and while they were gone, the Imperial Guard had begun to take the testament. And I love this. He realizes that they're too tense, and he invited somebody to have a drink with him, and they turned him down, and he's just like, there is absolutely no reason anybody would turn down having a drink with me. Okay? And honestly, that is the energy to live with. I love it. When the door crashed open, he was not surprised. So the two that come in there are larger, and obviously were chosen to deal with this dude because of their size. And they have all of these, alterations done to them. Uzziah recognized the plates of a plain strider from his homeland growing out of his skin. His partner had replaced one hand with a claw of a strange chimera, bright red and spiked like a venomous insect's fangs. I love this. The man with the red hands sighed and sat his sack down. We're supposed to keep you down here for a while. I don't know what it is. I feel like it's just the realization as they look at him that this is going to be a losing battle. It's just so depressing to them, you know? And he gives Urziah some wine to drink, and he drinks some first to prove it's safe. Although, you know, as it said, Urziah realizes this dude could have resistance to certain poisons. And maybe he's got a resistance to whatever this wine is poisoned with, and he's taken a sip to make it look like it's safe when it really isn't. But Urziah is actively seeking out handicaps to make himself a little bit less... I'm trying to think of the word. Less of a fucking avalanche of a human being? Really? He is the juggernaut, bitch. And he is wanting a fair fight, but he knows he's not going to get one. So he's like accepting that they put him in chains. He's accepting that they scratch him and give him a little bit of this poison that will slow his movements, like all of this. They promise up and down that there's nothing going on. He says something about, are you serving the witnesses now? And he says, what? No, Nuberius is going to be the next emperor. Urziah had kept a fake smile all this time. Now it became genuine. The battle was almost here. If the guards believed Nuberius was the next emperor, then there was nothing they wouldn't do to protect him. And Nuberius had no particular reason for trusting the Testament's crew. What I love about this scene is not just how insane of a badass Urziah is. Of course I love that. It's getting to see his putting two and two together in a way that I bet a lot of people wouldn't expect him to be able to do. So many folks just think if somebody is muscle that they're also not intelligent. And the way that Urziah talks can fool people, I would think, into believing that he is a babe in the woods a little bit. You know, like... He has an almost childlike way of speaking. You notice when you read his sentences that there are very few contractions. It's almost as if English is a second language to him, the way that he talks. And I don't think it is. So that's what gives him this sort of like childlike quality in his way. But he's clearly paying really close attention in a way that Calder could stand to learn a thing or two from. Calder hasn't been picking up on any of this, and Urziah's down here, like, way ahead of him, figuring out that this isn't right, and noticing the inconsistencies. And Calder, meanwhile, has to be explicitly told by Bliss, oh, Nuberius wants to kill you all, you know? And even then, it takes a minute for it to sink in. He's just so distracted right now. So... He says, you may scratch me. The guard extended one red claw and drew a bloody line down Urziah's forearm. Very good. Now take your chains and tie me. And they tell him, well, these are invested chains. Like, do you know what you're doing? And he's like, yeah, I mean, if they weren't invested, then this would literally not do anything, so it would be fine. He could feel the heat flowing through him from the tips of his fingers through his chest, tingling at the back of his neck. The familiar strength that came as the forces bound within his body rose to the fight. Emperor's name, I have missed that feeling. So, they take away his hatchets. They wrap him in chains. And he has a reaction when he sees them actively taking away his weapons. There's a moment where he's just like, oh, you motherfuckers. But he lets them. They treated the weapons with respect, carrying them each in a different hand and placing them reverently on top of a nearby crate. Urziah was grateful. He wouldn't hurt them too badly. I love this so much. So they padlock it shut. Dude's hands are shaking when he does it. And Urziah says, so, okay, we're all done with that. What's the plan now? And one of them says, we saw you in the arena. You fought like a madman. Yes, I did, Urziah said. The two guards drew their guns, and Urziah rolled chained shoulders. The poison fuzzed his vision at the edges and clouded his thoughts. The chains seemed unnaturally cold wherever they brushed his skin, drawing energy from his muscles. The wound on his arm itched and burned. He looked up into the two barrels and thought, at last, a fair fight. So the guard, who has this gun trained on him, is apologizing. And I'm like, oh, honey, you are not sorry yet. Oh, and the thing is, Urziah does, try to go easy on them. They didn't necessarily deserve that. They deserved worse, as he thinks of it later. The fact that they, actively lied to his face. They had dared to lie to him, and they hadn't bothered to lie well. They deserved their pain, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it from them. And there's an extra edge to this. He always loves fighting. But this is the first time that he has gotten to fight since the consultants have just, gotten away twice in a row. So he really feels like he has something to prove right now, which I don't blame him. There's nothing so humiliating as the thing that you're supposed to be good at not working out for you in front of people. Yeah, it's embarrassing. I understand. He shouldn't feel the way that he does because he clearly thinks everybody else is disappointed in him. And I don't think they are at all. But I understand. You guys know, right? There has to be something. I feel like there has to be a word in German for doing something you're normally good at in front of somebody. And it's like you've never done it in your life. All of a sudden, you're incompetent. And this is something you've done 30,000 times on your own without even thinking about it. And the second that somebody's like, oh, hey, can you show me how to do that? It's what? You completely lose. It's just the worst. So in that respect, I have the same kind of pride that he does, and I feel for him. The armored guard opened his mouth to shout for help, but Urziah's hand snapped up and through the chain, tearing it like a cobweb. His hand closed over the man's mouth. One of the links from the torn chain struck against the boards overhead and fell to the ground. No screaming, Urziah said, still smiling. Is that the scariest thing? This is something that I personally think Will White is exceptional at. Really badass threatening lines. This is the sort of thing that a lot of writers try to do, and they'll almost get it, but it's often really hokey, or it'll feel kind of cliched. I'm looking at you, Jim Butcher. I love Dresden Files, but there are a lot of moments in those where it's supposed to be a moment where somebody says something really memorable. And it feels almost, not quite. And I just feel consistently with Will White, there are lines here and there that I'm like, oh man, that was really intimidating. I don't know. I don't know if it's the simplicity that he doesn't try too hard. He's making it more about what the character is thinking rather than trying to make it impressive. And thus, it winds up being impressive because it is more about what the character is thinking. It's more about how casually they're viewing this whole thing. It's not about him worrying whether he can beat them. He knows he can beat them. He doesn't want to deal with their screaming. It's annoying. And he's smiling when he says it, which is so much worse to me. I should have mentioned too that they try to shoot him and the bullets literally bounce off, which I would have thought these guys would be aware of the fact that he has bulletproof skin. Evidently not. So I guess that what the champions are capable of is more of a secret than I thought it was. So yeah, they just didn't realize that was going to do fucking next to nothing. And there is a moment here where He leans in and looks at the red-clawed guard and tells him, "You get to live." He slammed a fist into the man's ribs, lifted him, and tossed him deeper into the hold. Urziah spun to catch the attack he knew would be coming from the back. He held out his hands to stop a strike that didn't come. Now, here goes a bit that not only is it written well, but it's delivered so well in the audiobook. He wasn't dead, and for a brief moment, Urziah's anger almost drowned him. If he wasn't dead, then he should be up and fighting. And if he wasn't up and fighting, then he should be dead. And Urziah is ready to literally crush this man's skull under his foot. He is so filled with rage over this, and it takes a second before he realizes that this is the Hydra, like he's soulbound to this thing, and it's pushing him. And he comes back to himself and realizes, oh God, okay, yep, I gotta recenter myself, this always happens. No matter how many times he fought in the arena, his greatest opponent was always his own soulbound vessel. The guild had given him many gifts other than his power as a soulbound, but the Hydra was his most powerful weapon and his oldest, never-defeated enemy. This is a recurring thing that I find really fascinating. Whenever a character has something that is simultaneously an advantage and disadvantage, Yaren and her Blood Shadow, of course, come to mind here. And this, the scene ends with him thinking, what a wonderful day. And then we cut to Calder. So he sees his whole crew clustered around the mast. And he says to one of the guardsmen, "What's going on? Has one of my crew done something wrong?" And he touches the railing and reads the ship because only Urziah does not seem to be here. And he can see Urziah in the hold, letting himself be wrapped up in chains. And Calder's like, what is happening? So the guard is using the same line. It's an inspection for the safety of the Emperor, yada, yada, yada. Calder slowly walked over to the others, taking stock. Andel's suit was stained, his hat was missing, and they had taken his white sun pendant, in case he was an unregistered soulbound, presumably. Interesting. That never occurred to me that they would just take away objects that were, like, of what's the word I want? Sentimental value, on the assumption that it might be a vessel. It makes sense, but I keep assuming that everybody's got a reader working for them and that they can just touch it and be like, oh yeah, this is a vessel. And they don't. Readers are rarer than I think they are. I keep sort of expecting them to be present in any like organized group that they would have one. And that's just not true. And even if there is a reader, it's not necessarily that they're great at it, you know? And when he asks where's Urziah, one of the guards says he caused a scene. And then a roar echoed up from the heart of the ship. Just then, a shot rang out, echoing from the depths of the vessel. Or maybe several shots. I love this. He's like, he caused a scene, which he definitely didn't do. But now he is, bitch. So this is when Calder can feel what's going on with the fight, and he is laughing to himself because Urziah is just fucking around with those guards, and he can tell what's happening. So, let's see, I'm trying to find... Oh, right, here it is. The scaled guard took Calder by the arm, shoving him against the mast. One of his hands rummaged around Calder's hip and jacket, looking for his pistol. Calder held it out between two fingers, waving it around, while making it clear he wasn't going to pull the trigger. "Nibirius, once I'm dead, I thought you might want my pistol." The guard froze in reaching for the pistol, hesitating now that the future emperor had actually responded. "It's a Dalton Foster original." He tossed the pistol overhand. As the gun sailed through the air, Calder silently pleaded that nothing would go wrong. The guards would hesitate. The bullet wouldn't fall out of the barrel in midair. Foster would take his meaning. This is so exciting, guys. I love this so much. In that meandering second while the gun hung in the air, a familiar weight settled on his shoulder. So, Dalton grabs the pistol from the air, fires instantly into the guard, and then stands up. As that guard fell, he pulled that man's pistol from its holster and leveled it at another. Y'all, I want to see this, please, on film. Also, I would welcome anybody's suggestions as to fan casting of Dalton Foster. I can't think who I want. You know who I keep imagining is the guy who plays Argus Filch and Walder Frey. I don't know why he's in my head. I think because he's just like an old crank who, especially when he was Walder, is like deceptively dangerous, even though he's just generally seems like he's just in a bad mood. And he's probably would be too old for this role now, but I feel like 15 years ago, it would have worked for him, you know? God, I'm 27 minutes into this. I really do need to speed it up a little bit, but there's so many like beats of this fight that I really enjoy. So here's when Urziah just comes busting up from the hold. He plowed into a guard with his shoulder, sending the man hurtling over the railing into the water. Urziah threw a hatchet with each hand, burying one blade in the back of Andal's captor and the other into the side of Calder's scaled guard. Those scales managed to deflect the hatchet, but he couldn't stop the awakened blade entirely. He grunted, blood leaked down his side, staggering back to look at his wound, and Calder managed to get the man's saber free. Many of the guards had discarded their pistols in favor of swords, either because they didn't have time to reload or because they thought the blades would do more against Urziah. They were wrong. So, I love, too, that throughout all of this, Shuffles is just, like, laughing hysterically. I just find Shuffles to be such a delightful harbinger kind of character. You know, he's like, oddly good-natured, considering how horrible the associations are between what delights him and what is actually going on in those moments. So Calder reads the ship again, and the ship is desperate to fight and wants Calder to call it to action. And he's like, no problem, I will do that. And the deck tilts, and it just begins to do all of this shit. The port side had risen, blocking off musket fire. The only part of the Eternal was still visible was the top of its mast and bright red sails. So all of these people begin to slide down one side of the ship. Again, I want to see this, please. I just keep, like, how cinematic would it be to just watch this deck rise up on one side and all the water pouring down off the hull, all these people sliding in one direction, but it's controlled. This isn't a capsize. This isn't a crash. This is the ship choosing to do this stuff to fuck with the people on board. Like, I love this idea. Calder tucked his mind back into his soulbound vessel, calling on the Testament's power, and grabbed the man with a coil of rope. The rope hurled the guard screaming over to the Eternal. Shuffles flew off Calder's shoulder, flapping in midair, mimicking the guard's scream and combining it with triumphant laughter. I swear to God, guys, I love this fucking little creep so much. And you know what? I shouldn't be calling Shuffles him, because it's said multiple times that they don't know if Shuffles is male or female, and I probably should be saying it the way that Will White does, but forgive me. Shuffles just feels like an 8-year-old boy to me somehow, even younger, and that is just what I'm going with in my guts. So Calder gets in a sword fight, and he winds up winning, and everybody is surprised, and there's a moment where Andal is like, we all thought that you were going to run away. I love Petal just being like, you use the ship to fight a lot. I don't really see you sword fight that much. I just enjoyed this bit. I use a variety of tactics. Cowards everywhere bow to your expertise, sir. Shuffles return, landing on top of his head this time. Coward. Ah, so good. So, what now, Captain? And he has had his ego pricked a bit by them calling him a coward. So he reaches out his hand for his pistol. Urziah, you, and I will be headed to the Eternal, where we will take Niberius hostage. Once we have him, we can negotiate our safe passage out of here. And Urziah is like, all right, how do we do this? He gets picked up and basically carried. I love this so much. Calder sends his instructions to the Leathaton. Calder sends his orders. The elder agrees with a mixture of reluctance, old resignation, and tireless wrath. He clutched a saber in his right hand and a pistol in his left and sent another message to the ship. Without warning, the ship corrected itself, crashing to port until it floated evenly. As soon as the port side bobbed down, Calder ran and jumped onto the railing, launching himself into the air. And the Leathaton catches him with his hand rising up beneath his boots. He stumbled but managed to remain standing despite the shock of pain that ran up the cut in his leg, ran across the surface of the palm, vaulted off, and made it to the deck of the ship. This minute here with Niberius, I really just wanted them to kill him so much. I will admit, guys, to deep disappointment in the fact that Niberius is still alive. I get it. I understand why, but I was like so hoping something would just happen and he would be dead by now. He can't be taken out of play this early. I know. But he is just such a poor choice. I understand in theory some of the arguments being made that he's better than nothing, but I don't agree. I just don't. And as we see later how deeply under Nikothi's thrall he is already, I don't feel like they're getting even a couple weeks out of him. I feel like days, maybe. I don't feel like even a full week. So Calder comes up against Niberius, says, I want him alive, and I suggest you let us speak with the guild heads. And as he is standing there, feeling himself a little bit, I think, there is this sudden sense of fear and nausea that rises up in him. And it's Jarlath Teach who has that fucking saber that makes him feel sick that he has to actively try not to read because it affects him so deeply. And when he first of all tries to say, I'm going to shoot this guy if you don't listen to me, Teach is essentially unmoved and says, I could kill you and everybody else before you even pulled the trigger, and you know that. And at this moment, Calder's like, a standoff, what are we going to do? At this moment, here comes Bliss. She stood in a clear space on the deck, black coat brushing the wood, pale hair drifting behind her. Some of the guards edged away from her. And Calder is just like, wait, you were on my ship? How are you here? And she tells him no one likes a man who asks too many questions. I love that. A magician does not reveal his secrets. I think I've told you guys before about how I was once talking to my father about his past, and he was telling me some like kind of rollicking stories that were meant to be fun, and they were. But there was like a hint of something beneath them, and I asked if he had ever killed anyone. For those who don't know, my father was Colombian, and he grew up in a very like war-torn country with a lot of guerrilla warfare, and he was part of the guerrillas growing up. And when I asked him, his face closed, and he said, "You ask too many questions." And I remember just being like, okay, I take it back. Never mind. I often wish that my dad had written some memoirs, but he was very ashamed of his past in a lot of ways, and I don't think he wanted to choose to remember any of that. So, the guild pulls a piece of bone out, and there's all of this cackling, but when he looks up, there's nothing there. And when he looks back down again, it has turned into this spear. She leaned forward on the balls of her feet, holding the spear with one hand near the head and one farther back on the haft. "Clear the deck!" General Teach shouted. "For your lives, get below!" They scramble out of the way. This one dude who had just managed to haul himself up the edge of the ship out of the water, his head pops up, he hears the order, and he just like drops back into the water. He's like, all right, well, fuck this then. Bliss tells Calder to go back to his ship and take Nibirius. And this is when, oh, right. I had said earlier that Urziah carries Calder to this ship, but my mistake. He carries him back. Threw Nibirius over his shoulder like a sack of grain. Teach bared an inch of her sword, and the force of its sheer bloodlust actually made Calder stagger backward a step. So she yells, "Stay where you are." And it's like a force of nature again. And he is struggling, trying to like keep himself from just screaming because of the force of this aura that is coming off this thing. And then Bliss closes her eyes, and when she opens her eyes again, they are glowing. Roots twisted up from the boards as though the wood had suddenly decided to bloom. The stalks flowered into leaves, then burst into flame, like 1,000 candles flaring to life. The sudden heat flashed against Calder's skin. They burned with impossible speed, ash and smoke rising into the air, twisting around Bliss in a double helix. What? She radiated an eternal intent, an insatiable hunger for change, a hatred of the physical world and all its restrictive laws. If it had its way, that power would shred the rules of nature and scatter them like confetti until the world flexed and moved and changed like the sea in a storm. Dope? That's rad. Just saying. What? I want to know so much more about what the fuck is going on here. I want to know how much of that is Bliss's power and how much of that is whatever is going on with her attachment to an elder spawn, perhaps, that she's got hidden under her clothes. Like, I like, maybe she's soul-bound to it. Maybe that's what's going on there. I genuinely don't know. So, Urziah picks up Calder, throws him over his other shoulder, and then jumps across the gap to the next ship again. And it hurts real bad. So then we go to Jerry's POV. And she gets woken up by a void transmission and has a moment of being completely disoriented, thinking that she's like in the cabin, reaching for her earrings, and then realizing where she actually is. And the voice that comes to her is asking whether the heart has arrived. And she replies in the affirmative that she felt it get to the island. And she's sort of wondering whether or not there's anybody in the consultants who has the same, like, attunement to elder forces that she does. She doesn't think that anybody else would have noticed its arrival the way that she did. And I'm curious if that's true. I wonder because, I have this running theory that Shara has some sort of connection to the elders. And I'm wondering if she were on the island instead of like transporting the heart herself, would she have sensed it arrive? I kind of feel like she would. I don't know. So Jerry, they tell her, when you feel the heart's power wax, use our gift. And they send something through the void and she has to duck out of the way as it comes crashing through. On closer inspection, it looked like a tight collar of braided black metal. And they say when the time is right, hold it and call out for help. I will be honest, you guys, so I know that it probably sounds stupid looking back that I didn't realize that the secret weapon Calder had been holding on to under his bed, the fact that I didn't think of the Emperor's crown at all might seem foolish, but I just assumed that was going to be under strict guard somewhere official. It never even occurred to me he would have gotten his hands on something like that. And for some reason, I also expected that if he had, it would radiate such power that people would notice it, And I also thought that if he were given it, it would wind up being in conjunction with whatever his mission is with Nibirius. So I expected it to be something that would wind up in his hands later down the line in relation to the mission. But now I am assuming that everything that I've been wondering about, whether, like, why they act weird in response to people saying, well, we need an emperor, has purely been based on the knowledge that they have the crown. And wondering if people are aware that they have it. I don't know what they were planning to do with it. Because when he uses it on the Grey Island, he doesn't want to. The suggestion comes from Andal, and he doesn't want to do it yet. He feels like we were saving that, And what were you going to do? But all that said, when Jerry gets this collar, I almost thought, is this the crown? Does it just look smaller right now than it actually is? I thought that was what this was going to wind up being. But no, it's clearly something totally different. She asks if it will free her, and the voice says potentially. And then the voice goes away, and she's like, Lucan, did you hear that? And Lucan's like, yeah, that was loud AF. Of course I heard that. And she says, I expect the voice only sounded loud to us. Out of this room, they would have likely heard nothing. And he's like, how does that make sense? And she uses this as an opportunity to be like, oh, well, that's something that people who know stuff about the elders know how to do. So I know that you think that we're full of shit, but maybe you should just be impressed by that and rethink your stance on a few things. And I was just like, Jerry, can you just not? Girl, you don't need to proselytize all the time. Imagine if our readers could craft messages that only certain people could hear. And he's like, imagine if you guys could, because I heard all of that. So, and then he wonders, maybe it's a radius around you that can, I don't know. And he sort of disappears thinking to himself. She left him to it. Her own father had taken advantage of her curiosity to induct her into the sleepless in the first place. And if she could pique the interest of a few others, then she would have repaid him well, especially if one of those others was a consultant. I'm really curious about all of this, what her father was like, the way she says taken advantage of her curiosity. It she doesn't seem to hold him any ill will in that, but there is something to the way that's phrased that feels a little predatory to me, and she's wondering about using this thing now, whether she should test it out, what could possibly happen. And then more importantly, when would the heart's power rise? If it wasn't in the next day or two, then the consultants would inevitably find the black metal stashed in her blankets. And she has apparently been trying to hide various, innocuous things, just out of curiosity to see when they search her room how thorough they actually are. And it turns out very. They are able to find all kinds of very small, inconsequential stuff. It's always gone. And she just figures this better happen soon because they will definitely take this away from me if they find it. Also, they're going to want to know how the fuck it got in here. So this is when Lucan says, Gyrene, something's coming. Don't say a word. You won't hear anything, but your life may be in danger. She may kill you on principle. Jerry heard nothing, but she felt another wave of cold crawl over her skin. This wasn't the same sharp, bitter cold as the void transmission, but the clammy, shivering cold of lifeless flesh. The heart of the dead mother. It was coming here. I don't remember how this goes, guys. I remember Shara getting to the island with the heart. I remember Yala trying to take it away from her and her being like, I don't fucking think so. And going to... Don't they, go to the consultant's, main meeting room or something? I'm trying to remember just how this goes. Or no, they go into... they wind up going to, Jorn Cursebreaker's area. I didn't remember the heart coming here. So I'm trying to put this in context of what I know, and I don't remember it. And when he says she may just kill you on principle, is it about who it would kill her just on principle? George says, yeah, after it broke out of the box, so that he could make something to drain its power and contain it. Right. I forgot all about that whole... Right. Thank you, George. Jan says Christopher Lloyd for Dalton Foster. Huh. I guess I could see... I think of him as so wacky, but... Or maybe, wait. Am I thinking of the right guy? Oh, sorry. George says, and I assume he's just talking about Shara wanting to kill Jerry. Yeah. Okay. I kind of thought that it was Shara that he was talking about. I'm looking up Christopher Lloyd to make sure that I have the right guy in mind. To make sure I have the wrong guy in mind. Oh, cool. My keyboard appears to be dead. So I'm thinking the guy from Back to the Future, Doc. Is that him? George says, because she was like, what the fuck? Why did we save her to begin with? Right. Yeah. And so that's what he means, just on principle. Okay. On GP, as the kids say. So they keep Nibirius gagged and tied to the mast as they head towards the Grey Island. Andal does not approve of this, but Calder's like, whatever. They see the wall of fog, and he is just like, what is that? And Petal explains, that's it. That's the island. That's why they call it that. And she says that a lot of alchemists try and duplicate that, standing perpetual fog, and they just can't. Nobody knows how they've managed this. And he wonders what it's for. As he puts it, consultants had never tried to hide the island's location. Calder had never been himself, but he'd spoken to those who had visited. And I'll tell you what, guys, I kept imagining when I was in Shara's POV that it was partially to hide the island. And when he said it like they'd never bothered to hide it, I was like, oh, okay. I know that there are other aspects of it, but I definitely thought, just obfuscation was certainly one of the perks. And it's super not. It would draw a ton of attention. I don't know why I didn't really put that together until now, but confession, I just did not. I'm assuming that, as an invited guest, you're going to get a different reaction from that fog than otherwise, but there, and of course we see the other things that Carrion does to try and activate it when the handmaiden appears and all of that stuff. George says probably hides them in it, though, since you can't see through it. Sure, I just thought that it was meant to completely hide the location of the island entirely. And of course it wouldn't, but I just had that in my head for some reason. So he's looking towards this island, and all of a sudden he sees Nibirius's eyes snap open, and he shoots to his feet, and Calder comes over, and he can feel the influence on Nibirius, reading him. Nibirius yells that song, "Do you hear the song?" And Calder is like, okay. So, when he asks Urziah, where is she, about Maya, he points to the island, to which Calder is like, fucking of course. Of course. She's in the same place as this fucking heart. Great, this is great. And they have an official crew meeting here. I love this so much. I was hoping we could talk off the record, Andal. Rejected, Andal said. Foster, take notes. I love this so much. So, they go through a whole song and dance about what they're going to do. But, eventually, Andal is like, I think we're in over our heads. It will take more than the usual amount of effort to get paid. But, I think we need to make it to the island. We're in too deep now. And we'd all like to know what the fuck is going on with Jyrene. I don't trust Nibirius. I don't trust his sponsors. I don't trust the consultants. And Calder says, I need to know if she's still alive. I would like to escape the island and get home alive. And for that purpose, I believe the heart is indispensable. We need something to trade for our freedom. And I don't think anything less than that heart will keep us out of the gallows. So, Andal says, we might need somebody to consult. And this is when Calder is like, holy shit, I feel like a fucking infant. How did I not think of that? Jesus, of course. Wow. And Andal is like, okay, yes, it is a good idea, and we should do it. However, we also need something that we can use to keep them from just fucking jumping us when we arrive. And Andal says, if only we had some sort of device that would protect us from hundreds of loyal Imperial citizens sworn to protect and obey. And Calder is like, no, I don't want that. He just resists doing this. So finally, he goes and gets the key. If anyone other than him picked up the key, they would feel a crippling pain in their hand. So, he goes and he gets it out. As of this reading, it doesn't say specifically what it is, but because we have read the other book, we know what it is. So now, chapter 19. I hear that you have awakened your mother's stand mirror. Upon hearing of its effects, I urged her to have the device melted down and to hire Aluminium Pilgrim to clean its remnants. Let me emphasize once again the dangers of awakening, as clearly my previous correspondence was not effective. I am desperate to know what this mirror did. I really, 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 really want to know. Hypothetically, let us say that you tried to awaken a mirror that once, unbeknownst to you, hung in the dungeon of a notorious murderer. Every day his victims look into it and wish to be saved. Would it not be likely the mirror would save a measure of their desperate intent? And when awakened, that very mirror might cry out for salvation. It might do anything to be free, including distorting the minds and senses of those nearby. Of course, we are speaking in the hypothetical sense. Are we? Are we, though? I want to know what that fucking mirror did. Tell me. Okay, so 11 years ago, Calder and Jyrene are taking notes about their fucking criminal enterprise. To those of you who have not seen The Wire, just go watch The Wire, okay? Sorry, but that was a reference to that. Are you taking notes on a motherfucking criminal enterprise? Because somebody is trying to do minutes during a meeting about what corners they're gonna... It's a whole thing. And they're talking about the ship and what they're like, how they're going to make their escape. It doesn't matter if the ship will sail. We won't be on board. We can't crew a ship with 2 people. And she's like, well, we're going to have your dad. And he's like, oh yeah, 3. I'll pilot, you navigate, and my father can man the rest of the ship. I really enjoy this because so often, like, women are placed in the role of being the serious one who keeps the man, like, tied to earth and grounded in reality. And it's really fun for it to be the opposite, where Calder is the one and Jerry's about to just do impulsive shit that she hasn't thought through entirely. It's just a nice reversal. You don't, again, these tropes of like women being the voice of reason with a reckless man, it's just so ingrained that I don't realize I'm expecting that until it's not done. And then all of a sudden I'm like, why does this scene feel so weird? And I realize, oh, because I expect the woman to play this role. You know, it's just so frequently the way. So let's see, they're sitting there figuring out how they're breaking his dad out. And she suggests that maybe the elder is supposed to pull the testament and the sails aren't actually going to be used. Calder had been the one to invest the mast so that it properly flexed against the tug of a full sail. But there was a better reason why Jerry's plan wouldn't work. They haven't summoned it. There's been an issue with the tidal forces or something. So there's no elder in play on that ship just yet. And I'm very interested to see if we as readers are going to get to witness them capturing it. I wonder what kind of, like, you know, involvement we're going to have with that. So she shows him her other plan. Operation Gyrene Does Calder's Job. Gyrene disguises herself in Calder's Black Watch uniform. Using her superior skills of thespianism and persuasion, Gyrene convinces the staff of an elder-related emergency. She will follow the supposed elder spawn to the very door of Roderick Martin's cell, thus insisting that it needs to be open. Remember, Calder, there will not actually be an elder spawn present. Do not be afraid, as Gyrene will protect you. With her authority as the Black Watch, she will take Roderick into custody, suspecting that the elders have corrupted him. Should the guards resist, Gyrene will subdue them with her legendary combat prowess. When she returns with Roderick Martin in tow, Calder will bow before her, kissing her feet and singing her praises to the heavens as she rightly deserves. This is such a bad plan. He looks at it and is like, I, in essence, think this could work. And I'm like, dude, I don't. Why do they think that going to Calder, or to Roderick specifically, and being like, we need this guy out of here, we think he's infested, like, they know about your interest in him, how often you've tried to get in there, they're gonna... And then her being like, oh, and I'll just fight off the guards. Will you? You will? All by your lonesome. Really? Multiple guards. On their home turf, professionally trained. Will you? Just the all of this just feels like it's so full of a childish surety that is simultaneously endearing and infuriating. So he says, a member of the Black Watch saying there's an elder loose has to constitute an emergency. And I'm like, will it? I just don't know, like, you don't know that either. He's making such assumptions and leaps here. And what does calling security look like, dude? You haven't seen what their, quote, security, when they really, like, tap into it, what that looks like. What are you thinking you're going to have to be dealing with here? Everything about this just feels really not great. He says that, like, the only proof they need is to... that nobody really knows how Elder Spawns behave or what the signs are that they're around. So that if they are Blackwatch, people will just take their word for it. And I just, again, don't know that that's true. I don't have the kind of confidence in any of this that they have. And I can't tell if it's because I don't know as much as they do or because I know more than they do. You know what I'm saying? So this is when she's like, how does the cell door open? And he, with this like massive sort of show of reluctance and ceremony, shows her the key that unlocks everything. And she does not have the reaction that he was hoping for. He wanted her to be like, wow, that is really amazing. She does not. She's just like, oh, okay, that's cool. And also assumes that he's the one invested it with that much intent that it can open any lock. She just figures it's from him. I can't tell if this is like a put on or if she genuinely assumes he can do it himself. So the next morning, Calder rose early. He buttoned up his coat, pinned on his badge, brushed his hair, and he goes into the dining hall, and there's nobody there except for his mother. And this is when she basically is like, you have accomplished a lot. You've been really good. You've come a long ways. I am going to give you a present. And before she can show him what's in this weird birdcage behind her, from within the shrouded birdcage came a voice like a collapsing tomb, which is great. What a great description. Dead. Calder jerked back, his hand going to the nails hanging inside his coat. Also held up a hand. Of the things you'll learn is that not all elders are the soul-devouring, grotesque monsters of legend. Some are just strange. Not all are malicious. And he's like, is that an elder? And she's an elder spawn. And I think it'll symbolize your membership in the Blackwatch. It's what's known as a bellowing horror, or more commonly, a bellows. Scarcely a foot tall, the size of a bird, and stubby, built along the lines of a short, fat man. Skin greenish-black like the wood of the Testament, and it had a pair of tiny wings that looked as though they belonged on a bat. A green, hairless bat. Its eyes, balls of formless black, glared at him from inside its leathery face. Its mouth was invisible, or perhaps non-existent, hidden behind a mass of squirming, worm-like tendrils. A bellowing horror? Calder repeated. Why is it called horror? It bellowed, flaring its pathetic wings. And she tells him she calls it Shuffles. And she's like, well, that is kind of how it walks. Also, I definitely had a cat that was named Shuffles. And I love this. She says, many of the Blackwatch keep pets. It's like having a bird. I had a similar pet myself until it fell into the bathtub and dissolved. What? What happened? Why did it dissolve? Oh my God. So she opens the cage. It flies at him. And he thinks that it's going to like attack him. And then it sort of like sits on his shoulder and like licks his face a little bit with its weird little tendrils. I think it wants to eat me, Calder whispered. Shuffles leaned closer to Calder's ear, growling with the voice of a malevolent earthquake. Eat. Elsa walked over and ruffled Calder's hair. It likes you. I love this so much. This is great. I love it. There's something about having met Shuffles already that makes this extra funny. So it jumps ahead a little bit to him and his mom in the back of a carriage. And he's thinking about what would happen if they failed. And I'm like, he just hasn't considered anything here. If they were caught beforehand, they wouldn't see much of a penalty. But if they were caught after, it won't be hard for people to figure out what had happened. What would happen to his mother? He hadn't planned on taking his father to stay at Greyweather House. But he figured that his father would be able to find somewhere else to stay. And now, that just seemed glaringly naive. If Calder failed and was caught, how much blame would fall on her? Would she be able to keep her position? Would the Black Watch come under scrutiny? What would Bliss do? Even if he succeeded, would his mother would eventually find out. Would she turn him in? Would she demand he resign? No, maybe she wouldn't find out. He had to place his hopes on that. She might suspect, but she'd have no proof. Dude. So basically that chapter ends there with him being like, oh boy, I guess I didn't think this through. No shit, bruh. Oh, I can't handle it. I'm so used to heists that are like exceedingly well organized, and reading about a heist that is not is stressing me the fuck out. It really is. Christ. So I'm over time. I better go. But thank you again, George, so much for commissioning this. Like I said, guys, there'll be a little bit of a break before the next episode, but tune in for it. I hope to see you then, October 29th. And until then, everybody, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.